The boy ran to save the elderly man who had fallen in the middle of the busy avenue, ignoring the danger. The next day, he could hardly believe it when the same man knocked on his door with a gift that would change his life forever. Luke walked down the street, his bare feet making soft, quick steps on the dusty road. The sun was high, and the cracked pavement seemed to reflect every ray, making everything hotter. His t-shirt was old, a bit faded, and his shorts hung loose around his skinny legs. The houses he passed were all the same, small, tired-looking, fenced by crumbling walls that offered little privacy. He moved through it all like he belonged because he did. This neighborhood was all he knew. As he approached the soccer field, a stretch of dried-up ground with rocks scattered everywhere, he saw the boys gathered there, waiting for him. He felt a smile spread across his face. They didn't have uniforms or cleats, but it didn't matter. The goalposts were made of 2 sticks dug into the earth, and the lines were imaginary. The game was still soccer, and soccer meant everything to Luke. "Hey, Luke, you coming or what?" shouted Jay, his best friend, standing in the makeshift goal. His voice echoed in the hot air, filled with impatience. Luke jogged closer, dropping a makeshift ball on the ground as he reached them. It was old, patched together from bits of rubber, but Luke held it like a prized possession. He kicked it to Jay. "Let's do it," Luke said. He didn't need to say more. The others cheered, and they split into teams right there without any arguments. It was simple. It always was. The game began, and Luke ran across the dry ground, feeling the rush he loved so much. Dirt clung to his bare feet, and he ignored the sharp pain when he stepped on a rock. He dribbled past one of the boys, then another, and then launched the ball toward Jay, who caught it easily. The field, the laughter, the quick breathing. This was the best part of Luke's day. When the game ended, everyone sprawled out on the ground to catch their breath. Luke sat back, resting his head against his knees. The boys were talking, their voices filled with a mix of excitement and hopelessness. "You think we could play on a real field one day?" one of the boys, Mateo, asked, almost as if he was talking to himself. "Maybe," Jay said, shrugging. He wiped sweat from his forehead, then looked at Luke. "What do you think, Luke? Think we could make it?" Luke wanted to answer with a confident yes, but all he could do was nod, not trusting his voice to hide his doubts. He didn't know how it could happen, not with everything that stood in their way, but it was better to nod and hope just a little than to say nothing at all. As the sun started to set, Luke left the field, walking back toward home. The dust clung to his legs, and the sweat made his shirt stick to his back. His neighborhood came back into view, a clutter of homes with small windows and tired people who walked slowly, as if the weight of life was heavier here. He watched it all as he walked. Seeing his own little house at the end of the street, he knew his mom was still at work. She worked long hours as a maid, and sometimes she'd come home so tired she'd barely say a word. He walked inside, setting his things down quietly. There wasn't much to do here, but he cleaned up a bit. It was something he had taken on with no one telling him to. With his mom working so much and his dad gone, it just made sense. The only noise in the small house was the sound of the old ceiling fan creaking above. A little while later, the door opened, and his mother stepped inside. She looked worn out, the lines under her eyes deep from exhaustion. Her smile, though, when she saw Luke, was as warm as she could manage. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft. She placed her purse down, and Luke could hear her tired sigh. "Hey, Mom," Luke replied. He wanted to help her, but she waved him off. Already settling down on the small sofa, she glanced at him, her eyes moving from his dusty feet to his face. "Soccer again?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah," he said. She nodded, her eyes growing distant for a moment. "You know, your dad, he used to play too. You remind me of him sometimes," she said, almost to herself. Luke stayed silent. He didn't like talking about his dad. His dad had left without any proper explanation, and it left a gap that Luke couldn't fill, no matter how much he played or helped out around the house. "I'm going to make something to eat," he said, changing the subject quickly. His mother nodded, and he went to the small kitchen. As he boiled water for some pasta, he looked down at his feet, dirty, sore, bare. He thought about his friends, their dreams of becoming soccer players. And for a moment, the thought seemed ridiculous. His dad had tried and failed. Who was he to think he could be different? That night, after dinner, he went to bed with those thoughts in his head. The darkness of his small room seemed to press in on him, and he wished he could just sleep and not think about it at all. But even with his eyes closed, he could see the field, the boys running, and the ball at his feet. He sighed, unsure if what he felt was hope or just foolishness. All he knew was that he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he had to keep trying. Luke woke up to the sound of the neighbor's dog barking. The sun had barely risen, but he was already used to early mornings. He got dressed quickly, put on his worn-out t-shirt, and stepped outside. The air was cool, a break from the usual heat that blanketed the neighborhood later in the day. Today, he was planning on meeting Jay again at the field. They said they'd have a rematch since the teams were uneven the day before. He walked down the street, kicking a small stone ahead of him, watching it bounce over the pavement. The neighborhood was starting to wake up, people heading to work, doors opening, old cars starting up. Luke liked these moments. There was a quietness to them that made everything seem simpler. No expectations, no big dreams that felt impossible. Just now. But as he walked, something caught his attention near the main avenue. It was a wheelchair, abandoned in the middle of the street. Luke's heart skipped a beat when he saw an elderly man struggling to push it free. Cars zoomed by, some honking, but no one stopped. Luke's instincts took over, ignoring the rush of fear and the blaring horns. He sprinted toward the man. As he reached him, Luke grabbed the wheelchair's handles and heaved it out of the rut in the pavement. The man's grateful smile was worth every second of danger. "Thank you, son," the man said, his voice trembling but full of emotion. "I don't know what I would have done." Luke nodded, catching his breath. "It's okay. I'm glad I was here." Little did Luke know, this moment of courage would set off a series of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, Luke was startled by a knock at the door. When he opened it, the same elderly man stood there, smiling warmly, a small envelope in his hand. "Morning, young man. May I come in?" Luke's mother appeared behind him, looking surprised but welcoming. They invited the man inside, and he handed Luke the envelope. "This is for you," he said. "You gave me a second chance yesterday, and I want to give you something in return." Luke opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a voucher for enrollment in a local soccer academy, an opportunity he had only dreamed about. "Is this real?" Luke whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It is," the man replied. "You have heart. Boy, that's rare. I believe in you." Luke looked at his mother, who had tears in her eyes. "Mom, I can't believe this. Do you think I can do it?" She hugged him tightly, her voice trembling. "I know you can." From that day forward, Luke's life took a new path. The challenges of the academy were daunting, but Luke faced them with the same determination that had led him to save a stranger in the street. And as he stepped onto the field, now wearing proper cleats and a uniform, he realized that sometimes, even the smallest acts of bravery could lead to the biggest changes.